Hey guys, so today we're going to be reading the Father Browne section in Liftoff. So you're going to need to go to page 88, I think. Let me check. Here we are on page 88, okay? Father Francis Browne. So once we're ready, we'll read this section here about his biography, which tells us about his life, okay? So I'll start here. Francis Browne was born in Cork in 1880. When Francis was a few days old, his mother died. His uncle, Robert Browne, was the Roman Catholic Bishop of Cloyne. He became guardian to Francis and his brothers after their father drowned in 1889. After finishing secondary school, Francis decided to become a priest. In 1897, Uncle Robert sent Francis on a grand tour of Europe. He also bought Francis his first camera to record this trip. This camera led Francis to discover his natural talent and love for photography. When he returned, Francis started his training to become a priest. So Francis had quite an unusual start in life. He was born in 1880, which is only 30 years after the famine that we learnt about last week. And his mammy died when he was only a few days old. And then his dad drowned in 1889 when he was only 9 years old. So he was left an orphan. And his uncle, who was the bishop, became his guardian. That means somebody who looks after you in place of your parents. Okay? So, and then when he was only 17, he went on a grand tour of Europe. Lucky boy. And that was when he started to discover his love of photography. Okay, then we go on to the next page, page 89. And here we read about the Titanic. The Titanic, which we have learnt about last week, was built in Belfast and had to travel from there to Southampton in England. This was not classed as its maiden voyage, as it was just the delivery of the ship to its owners. In early 1912, so 109 years ago now, Uncle Robert gave Francis a first-class ticket for the real maiden voyage of the Titanic to bring him from the port of Southampton to the port of Cove in County Cork. Now, just to get a good idea of this, guys, you might want to have a look on Google Maps or in an atlas and see if you can find Southampton in the south of England, Belfast, where the ship was built, and Cove in County Cork, which was known as Queenstown at the time. What age would Francis have been in 1912 if he was born in 1880? I'll continue reading. On the morning of the 12th of April 1912, Francis arrived at Waterloo Station in London to catch a train to Southampton. He immediately started taking photographs, first recording the train journey and then life aboard the Titanic on the voyage to Cherbourg in France and eventually on to Cove. Francis took photos of real people going about their lives on board the Titanic. While on board the ship to Cove, he became friendly with a wealthy American family. They offered to buy him a ticket for the journey to America. Francis was really excited as he had very little money of his own. He sent a telegram, which was a written message sent through wires, so like a text message but delivered on wires and then printed out, looking for permission from his order, the Jesuits, to go on to New York. He got a telegram back telling him to get off the ship immediately. The Jesuits, guys, does anyone here have any connection with the Jesuits here in Galway? I think we might have a school in Galway that is still run by the Jesuit priests. That's a group of priests. And in fact, the Pope himself, Pope Francis, is a Jesuit. Anyway, what happened was Francis looked for permission to sail to America. Somebody was going to buy him a ticket. But the head of his order said, "Nope, Francis, get off the ship immediately. You need to come back." Little did he know at the time that the telegram had saved his life. He got off the ship, bringing his camera and photographs with him. A few days later, the unthinkable happened, and the Titanic sank, claiming over 1,500 lives. Most of the people in Francis's photographs died. His photographs soon appeared on the front pages of newspapers all around the world. They are considered to be a rare and valuable account of the tragic event. If you remember the history that we did earlier on in this school year, guys, you might remember that I talked about artefacts, which are things that are left behind that record history for us. And I would say that Father Browne's photographs of the Titanic would be really, really valuable artefacts. Now, we continue on to page 90. Francis took many photographs of the ship's interior. Without these, we wouldn't know what the interior of the Titanic had looked like. He also captured people walking up on deck. These photographs were used by the filmmakers when designing the set for the 1997 film Titanic. Later, 4 years later, in 1916, Father Browne went to France as chaplain for the Irish soldiers who were fighting in the trenches in France in World War I. He was injured 5 times, including in a near-fatal gas attack in 1918. Near-fatal means he nearly died. Father Browne took photographs of soldiers fighting. He also wrote many letters home describing the terrible things that were happening during the war. In one such letter home, he wrote, "On St. Stephen's Day, the men were engaged in a football match when the Germans saw them. They sent over a lovely shot at long range, which carried away the goalpost, and, bursting in the middle of the men, killed 3 and wounded 7. The wounded were bandaged up and carried away to hospital, and the dead were carried away for burial. Then the ball was kicked off once more, and the game went on as if nothing had happened. The Germans must have admired the cool pluck of the players, for they did not fire any more." So the Irish and British soldiers were playing football, and the Germans fired, I think, probably a shell from an artillery cannon that killed many of them and wounded many more. Killed 3 and wounded 7. But they decided to play on afterwards. And the Germans must have admired the cool pluck. I wonder what you think that means. The cool pluck of the players. It's not a phrase that we use anymore, but you might be able to figure out what he meant by that. Okay. And we continue on to the last page. After the war, Father Browne travelled between France and Germany before returning to Ireland in 1920. Father Browne continued taking photographs until his death in 1960. His photographs were lost after his death. A priest called Father Eddie O'Donnell rediscovered his photographs in 1986. About 42,000 negatives from which the photographs are developed were found in a metal trunk, which is a large box suitcase, in an attic in County Laois. Among the negatives were more than 1,000 images of the Titanic, along with his photos of World War I. I'll pause just right here, guys. Do you think that this was a find of valuable historical artefacts? My goodness, can you imagine how excited Father Eddie O'Donnell must have been when he found them? I'll continue from here. His photos of Dublin told the story of life in Ireland up to the 1950s. After the photographs were found, David Davison, an expert on photography, was asked to advise on the best way of conserving, saving, or preserving them. Over half of the negatives were in very poor condition. David and his son Edwin worked hard to save the negatives and made copies of them. For nearly 30 years, Father Browne's photographs have been published, printed in book form, and exhibited, shown around the world. Father Browne is now thought to be not only one of Ireland's greatest photographers, but a photographer of world renown, which means importance and kind of fame as well. Now, and we get to see some more of the photos that Father Browne took on the Titanic there. But I came across something this morning, guys, when we were talking about Father Browne, Miss Cronin and I had forgotten that I owned this, and I'm going to show you this, and we might have a look at some more of the artifacts from this book later in the week. I'll show it to you right here. Just give me a moment. So look at this. This is a book of photographs that Father Browne took in Galway, because he visited Galway regularly here. I presume he stayed with the Jesuits here in Galway on Sea Road. You know where the Jes school is. That's the Jesuit school. And this book is full of amazing photographs that Father Browne took in Galway on his many visits to the town. So we might have a look at some of those later on in the week, just to see our own personal connection with Father Browne and how he documented the history of Galway and left us these wonderful artefacts from his life. So thank you very much. Enjoy your reading and answering the questions, guys.